PFM, and all the time we are dealing with the economy, what is this thing that we refer to as GDP? And Madam Speaker, figuratively, if there was an auction of countries somewhere, and countries would be auctioned, Madam Speaker, the value in terms of global prices that Kenya would fetch, that, Madam Speaker, is what would be GDP. And Madam Speaker, there are three ways on how you can calculate that GDP. One, you can calculate in terms of aggregating all the household revenues, that is incomes. That is number one. Number two, Madam Speaker, and I'm making this case because it will be an incessant jargon going forward. The other one is where you calculate GDP by using, number one, aggregating private consumption plus private investments, then, Madam Speaker, plus government, that is G. That is both government investment and government consumption, and then plus X minus M, which is exports minus imports. And I'll make the reference on why I'm doing all these manenos. Madam Speaker, there is a simpler one that I want to dwell in, where we calculate GDP as agriculture, representing the entire primary production, which is agriculture, mining, forestry, fisheries, and all other primary production, Madam Speaker. Then you add that to the industry. Industry is everything around manufacturing and value addition, and everything else in between. And then, Madam Speaker, plus service, which is tertiary. Madam Speaker, why am I saying all these things? Kenya currently, our GDP, if you put Kenyan GDP as a pie, Madam Speaker, what is agric or primary production accounts for around 18.2% of our GDP. Madam Speaker, industry, value addition, and everything in between accounts for 16.8% of our GDP. That leaves service industry, which is tertiary, accounting for 65% of our GDP. Now, what are we doing so that we grow our economy, and especially using the two formulas? And now I'm using the allocations that you have made in our budget and other policy issues that will be coming along. Madam Speaker, we must spur our primary production because there is still a lot of room for improvement. And that is the reason why we are giving fertilizer to our farmers so that they can capitalize on their yield, which is still at the primary level. Madam Speaker, it is the same reason, Madam Speaker, that even through policy, we are necessitating our forestry, Madam Speaker, to be a revenue stream, because this is a great wealth we have, but economies are not run by wealth. Economies are run by income. So we must, Madam Speaker, turn around the wealth that we have to become revenue streams. And it is the same reason, Madam Speaker, in this budget, we have allocated 500 million Kenya shillings to go to the mining department for ground truthing. Because, Madam Speaker, recently, we did what we call geospatial survey, Madam Speaker. But we need to identify, out of around 900 minerals that we have in the country, the quantity, the yield, Madam Speaker, and also the quality. That can be established through ground truthing. And in these estimates, Madam Speaker, we have allocated Kenya shillings 500 million to go into mining and specifically into ground truthing. Madam Speaker, on the same, we have allocated around 20 million to aggregate all the artisanal miners because that is primary production. Madam Speaker, for the industry to thrive, they must have what they are processing. And that is why we are putting resources. The ones I've enumerated, fertilizer, in terms of mining, in terms of forestry, because that primary production is the one then that necessitates industry by giving industry something to process. Madam Speaker, on industry, we have allocated monies, 4.7 billion Kenya shillings, which is the first batch, which we are giving as conditional grants to our counties. Because, Madam Speaker, in all the 47 counties of Kenya, we are building aggregation centers. And therefore, Madam Speaker, National government will be giving our counties 4.7 billion. Our counties will be giving 4.7 billion. And each 200 million we take off, then we capitalize as we go along. Madam Speaker, on the same, we have allocated 3 billion Kenya shillings to start industrial parks in 6 gazetted EPZ sites. Madam Speaker, we will also be going forward after they absorb that monies. We seek to be allocating a similar amount for us to have very modern and robust 6 industrial centers across the country, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, on the tertiary, I need to say something that we deliberated upon. Madam Speaker, if you look at the economy of Kenya, there is a little imbalance. Because yes, we are doing what we can in terms of primary, we are doing a lot in terms of industry, but Madam Speaker, service seems to leap forward ahead. Because Madam Speaker, if you look at our economy, 65% being generated by service. What is service servicing? That is the question. And for a solid economy, Madam Speaker, the other two must be given the wherewithal, Madam Speaker, to increase in terms of percentage. That is why you see in our country, which is a mismatch, service industry, which is banking, insurance, fintech, and all the others. Madam Speaker, these are the companies that are reporting every year growth in profits. But why don't we see the same in industry and in primary production? Madam Speaker, that is something that we have to think as a house, because you cannot have an economy growing on the facilitative side, which is service, yet the other solid sectors, which is primary and industry, Madam Speaker, are stagnating. In terms of policy, Madam Speaker, there is no way we can have fintech going miles ahead, banking going miles ahead. What are these banks banking? And therefore, Madam Speaker, the more the reason to have the two other sides of production also being capacitated to grow. Madam Speaker, I wish to say a few things, and today I will not belabor a lot of points. I wish to say something about inflation, because everything we talk about here in this house, the people of Kenya, after all the good language that we talk here, it must reflect on the cost of living. Madam Speaker, whatever we call high cost of living has everything to do with inflation. In Kenya, across the world also, inflation has 3 elements. Number one, there is a huge component that is sensitive to all Kenyans and all ordinary citizens of the world. The segment of inflation we call food inflation. The second segment of inflation is the one we call fuel inflation. And Madam Speaker, the last one is the last one that we call co-inflation, which is non-fuel and non-food inflation. What is it that has been driving the inflation, especially in Kenya, Madam Speaker? Unfortunately, it is the food inflation and the fuel inflation. But then how do we arrest this? Because all these things somehow fight their way into the budget. Madam Speaker, to arrest food inflation and fuel inflation, this is only done through fiscal policies. You cannot do this using monetary policies. Throwing money or mopping out money, Madam Speaker, do not cure issues that should ordinarily be cured by fiscal policies. Madam Speaker, the reason why we have seen escalating food prices across the world, number one, is physical in nature. We have had supply chains being cut off, and especially after Russia-Ukraine war, because the two countries combined were the biggest importers or exporters of wheat, Madam Speaker. They were the biggest importers of edible oils, Madam Speaker, and therefore the inflation part of it that we have in Kenya, and especially in edible oils, Madam Speaker, part of the genesis is the war that we have in Europe. Madam Speaker, also on fuel, you cannot arrest this using monetary tools. Madam Speaker, global oil prices and everything in between, Madam Speaker, this cannot be addressed by just having our MPC meeting and regularly giving new interest rates, Madam Speaker, and especially as base rates. That leaves monetary policy, Madam Speaker, to only deal with co-inflation. And therefore, Madam Speaker, because budget is one of the important tools of addressing fiscal policies, that is why we are putting money, Madam Speaker, as I said before, to address the supply chain of food, that is in agriculture, to make sure we have enough supplies. Madam Speaker, that is the same reason we have allocated money in the supply chains of edible oils, Madam Speaker, so that we can continue, Madam Speaker, to also look inwards on how we can get our own supply chains so that we do not expose our country and our citizenry under the vagaries of global circumstances, Madam Speaker. And I can confirm to this House, we have already done that in the budget by allocating requisite resources for that, Madam Speaker, to be realized. And Madam Speaker, we started that in the supplementary budget. Now we expect a bumper harvest. We have allocated money, 5 billion Kenya shillings, into fertilizer in the current year under consideration. And these are the fiscal policies, Madam Speaker, that will enhance food production and therefore consequently lower the cost of living, because you address such issues at the production level, not at the consumption level, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, allow me to say something on the highlights, just a few highlights. But before I go to highlights, let me say something about our fiscal deficit. Madam Speaker, in the year 2021-2022, our fiscal deficit as a share of the GDP was around 6.3%. It was actually closing to 900 billion. Last financial year, Madam Speaker, what appeared in the books was around 860 billion Kenya shillings. But unfortunately, upon being where we are in the budget committee and scrutinizing further, we realized there was an extra 200 billion which was spent under Article 223, which, Madam Speaker, was also part of the deficit. So in actual sense, our deficit, the current year that we are exiting, was actually 1.1 trillion Kenya shillings. Madam Speaker, in the supplementary estimates, we brought that down to around 5.7% of our GDP. And I want to announce good news to this House and also to the Kenyan people. But truly, the path of fiscal consolidation is the path that we have taken. And we have decided that we are not going to dig deeper into the hole of borrowing. And that is why, Madam Speaker, we have climbed down this financial year from last year, which had a fiscal deficit of 1.1 trillion. We have brought that down to 718 billion Kenya shillings. And Madam Speaker, currently, we are now at a stable 4.4% of deficit as a share of our GDP, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, we anticipate to lower that in the next financial year, and we expect to actually lower that to 3.6% as a deficit as a share of our GDP, Madam Speaker, so that our country must continue relying on its internal resources. There is a reason why we are doing this, Madam Speaker. We have not seen a country, and especially an emerging economy, that has grown on the basis of borrowing. Even the biggest economies like Japan, which have borrowed to a tune of 250% as a share of their GDP in terms of their debt portfolio, Madam Speaker, Japan has not realized any real growth since 1994. One of the reasons why we must not continue overborrowing as a country and as an economy. Madam Speaker, that is the same reason that even in terms of policy, we want our borrowing not to be exceeding 55% in terms of the entire debt portfolio of our GDP. Madam Speaker, all these compounds and all this, Madam Speaker, has an effect to our budget. And Madam Speaker, how? I've just said there before, and enumerated that we are spending 986 billion Kenya shillings into CFS. CFS basically, Madam Speaker, is the monies that go into repayment of debts. Madam Speaker, we are spending more money to pay debts than we are spending to pay our entire civil service. Madam Speaker, we are spending much more money to pay our debts, interest rate alone, Madam Speaker, than the money we are spending for development as a country. Madam Speaker, this cannot continue. It cannot continue as business as usual, and that is why we are climbing down in terms of borrowing. Madam Speaker, I just wish to say a few highlights, then I sit down. I do wish that members can capture this because this is now where the resources are. Number one, Madam Speaker, our biggest ticket in terms of spending this financial year of consideration is education. Madam Speaker, we have allocated 630 billion Kenya shillings into our education sector. Madam Speaker, of all the factors of production that we have as a country, as the Budget and Appropriations Committee, and as this House, Madam Speaker, the highest priced, Madam Speaker, is the people of Kenya, the human capital. And that is why we are putting a third of our budget into refining, into adding value to our labor. Madam Speaker, we are putting 26 billion Kenya shillings into capitation of our JSS. Madam Speaker, in other words, we are almost doubling our JSS capitation because we want to take care of the next year's class, Madam Speaker, which will be a new class in January. Mr. Speaker, yes, I've seen how we have a Mr. Mr. Speaker, we have also allocated monies for school feeding program for the children who go to school, Mr. Speaker, coming from areas that are ravaged by drought. Madam Speaker, we have allocated 5 billion Kenya shillings. Mr. Speaker, sorry, I'm mixing Mr. and Mrs. and Mr. and Madam because we have had a change of the Speaker on the chair. Mr. Speaker, I can see my time is almost up. I just want to highlight the others in quick succession. We have allocated, Mr. Speaker, an extra 10 billion Kenya shillings into NGCDF. In the next financial year, we have allocated an extra 1 billion Kenya shillings into GAF, Mr. Speaker. We have doubled our allocation into higher education loans board from 16 billion on this financial year to 30 billion Kenya shillings in the next financial year, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there are many other areas which we have allocated a lot of money, Mr. Speaker. We have allocated 3 billion Kenya shillings into finishing 181 markets that we have started during the economics, the 208 ESP, Mr. Speaker. 3 billion Kenya shillings into finishing all those. We have allocated money into operationalizing the 21 KMTCs that are already complete, Mr. Speaker, across our
Order. Order, honorable members. It's not your discretion, it's the discretion of the chair. Proceed and have your 2 minutes. Order. Proceed.
Mr. Speaker, allow me to refer to these ones, the rest we had, because I want to mention all of them. Mr. Speaker, we have allocated 2 billion Kenya shillings. These are just the highlights of resettling the squatters in many areas where we have absentee landlords, Mr. Speaker. We have allocated monies into finishing the ongoing TVETs, Mr. Speaker, across our constituencies. Mr. Speaker, we have allocated monies, 10 billion Kenya shillings, into the equalization fund, Mr. Speaker. We have allocated, Mr. Speaker, I had said about 5 billion Kenya shillings into fertilizer and other, Mr. Speaker, value chains within agriculture and the rest. Mr. Speaker, around the same year, we anticipate to also spur our digital economy. We have allocated money into fiber optic. Mr. Speaker, we are receiving some money from the Universal Fund and we'll be receiving some money also from World Bank. Mr. Speaker, I want to add by saying that this particular financial year, we have not just thrown money into projects. Mr. Speaker, we have made a collective decision that we are going to finish all the ongoing projects, and especially in roads, Mr. Speaker, so that the people of Kenya can start enjoying the utility of those roads. At the current situation, Mr. Speaker, we have over 700 billion commitments in the road sector, and we have allocated 249 billion Kenya shillings that will go into roads, Mr. Speaker, in terms of maintenance and also development. Mr. Speaker, with those many remarks, Mr. Speaker, I want to thank these very great colleagues of mine, Mr. Speaker, who have always helped me, Mr. Speaker, in terms of the things I have enumerated, and to whom, after the many interactions we have with them, Mr. Speaker, I end up as a net gainer after learning from them, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to invite and request the Vice Chair of the Budget and Appropriations Committee, the very able Madam Mary Emase, to second the report.
Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for the opportunity. And from the onset, I also want to join my chairman to just congratulate and thank all the chairmen of the various departmental committees for the submissions and a very good job. And also, without forgetting to appreciate in a very special way members of the Budget and Appropriations Committee who are so committed, dedicated, and you know, they gave their all, and sometimes we went late into the night just to make sure that this report is ready on time. Thank you, honorable members. Chair, I will not go into the macroeconomic aspects and within which the budget has been prepared, because my chair has alluded to that and has ably enumerated the main factors. Chair, I want to say that the budget, the 2023-2024 budget estimates were actually anchored on the theme of the BPS for this financial year, which is better, the bottom-up economic transformation agenda for inclusive growth. Further, these budget estimates were also premised on the Kenya Kwanza manifesto, and it's also important to note it's the very first budget prepared under the Kenya Kwanza government. Having said that, Mr. Speaker, allow me to kind of demystify some of the facts around the budget. Because we noted even during our interactions with the media, when we did a press release, most of the questions were being asked were about the finance bill. In one way or the other, there seems to be some kind of need for clarification, because many Kenyans are assuming finance and budget are the same, but I don't blame them. They're not very far from the truth, because you cannot speak about budget without talking about revenue and without referring to debt. So, Mr. Speaker, I want to tell Kenyans the budget is basically about distributing the cake. It's about how we are planning to spend our money for the financial year 2023-2024. How do we intend to spend it on goods and procuring goods and services? How do we plan to spend it on development projects, on transfer payments? And by transfer payments, I'm just referring to payments that we make to programs like Inua Jamii, like the money for elders, which is normally an exchange that does not, a transfer of money that does not involve transfer of goods and services. So, Mr. Speaker, having said that, again, I want to say this budget, we all know that during the campaigns, the president went around the country and promised Kenyans what he was going to do. Further, he has continued to visit the country and is given promises. And I know he has visited many parts of this country, including my own county, Busia. And whenever the president is in our regions, whenever we get the platform to speak, we say how we want these roads done, how we want our hospitals equipped and upgraded, how we want the roads, how we want, you know, money for security in the northern regions, how we want money for mitigation of floods. So basically, this budget speaks and resonates with the aspirations of Kenyans, seeks to address the challenges Kenyans are facing, and seeks to meet the obligations of the nation. And as a budget committee, again, we mandated by the Constitution, we did travel Kenya. We traveled to most parts of Kenya to seek the opinions of the people, their views about what they expect, what they want from government to be factored in this budget. And after doing that exercise, honorable members, I want to assure you that we have also factored the concerns of members of the public in the processing of this budget. However, I want to also, like I said, I want to clarify the difference. I say that we cannot talk about the budget without making reference to the finance. Because this is an equation. Basically, as budget distributes the money, there is another arm that has got to look for this money and tell us where the money is coming from, and that is the finance. And I think that's why the finance bill kept on coming up. So revenue has got to be generated so that the budget part, the arm of the equation, does the distribution. So money that we propose to distribute must actually be raised. And this money would be raised through A&A, would be raised through taxes, would be raised through donors. We may get some donor funding from some friendly countries. So like Chair has already said, I want to speak up a little bit about the deficit. He has already alluded to the deficit that we have. That is about 718 billion. When you look at the budget in totality, what we have presented to us by National Treasury was about 3.599 trillion. But as you all know, the work of the Budget and Appropriations Committee is to review, is to interrogate, and in certain cases, in the interest of equity and many other factors, we do make some adjustments. The total budget in totality, as it stands now, as proposed by the BSC, is 3.680 trillion. And when we look at the grants, when you look at the revenue, excluding grants, we are at 2.893 trillion. But with including grants, is 2.935 trillion. So we are having a deficit. If you go by the submissions by National Treasury, we are having a deficit of about 663 billion. But with proposals by BSC, we are at 718. So we have the deficit. That deficit must be financed. Whichever way you look at it, it has to be financed one way or the other. And it can be financed by borrowing internally or externally, or sometimes by borrowing a mix of the two for us to be able to generate revenue to finance our budgets. But honorable members, we also need to remember that we've received a lot of pressure from Kenyans, that we need to be cautious on the manner in which we are going to borrow, or with the trends we set with respect to borrowing, so that we do not burden future generations with a lot of debts. We are also reminded every day by Kenyans about the spiraling cost of living, the high cost of living, and we are reminded that we need to be very careful in the manner in which we even budget and appropriate our money. So generally, we are preparing this budget amidst a lot of challenges and in very difficult times. And therefore, that is why in preparing this budget, the committee has been very keen to ensure that the sectors, the areas that we are allocating money, are addressing the challenges experienced by Kenyans. And we said borrowing is not bad, but what is important, what Kenyans want to see is how accountable are we in spending this money. Kenyans want to see accountability and transparency on both sides of the equation. How are we generating this money? How are we raising it? And how are we spending it on the other side? Kenyans expect to see value for money. And talking of value for money, allow me now, honorable members, I want to touch on a number of areas, some of the observations by our committee. Our committee, while scrutinizing and interrogating the budget, we noted a number of issues that should be of concern. For example, there's the issue of duplication of roles. I'll give an example of water. We are saying that let water be domiciled within the sector that it should be, so that we do not see water in the blue economy and irrigation. We do not see water in education. We do not see water again in another department. We are saying there is need to rationalize, to ensure that a particular program is domiciled only within one ministry, so that we're able to see value for money. Again, on the same, we also noted with concern that some MDAs, some ministries, departments, and agencies are pursuing so many projects at the same time. You find a ministry has a project, an irrigation project, probably it's a dam for 1 billion. The allocation is 150 million or 200 million. And there are probably 6 or 5 of them. Another one is worth 500 million. It's being allocated 50 million or 70 million. So for how long will such kind of a project take to complete? So we are saying in our recommendation that there is need for a ministry or a department or an agency to pursue one project, complete it, and then probably the next financial year pick up on another project. Also, another area of concern is the area of unemployment in this country. It is a concern. Many ministries have frozen employment in the last 3 to 5 years.
Yeah, you can have 1 minute, no more than a minute.
And we find that in some departments, we have an aging population. So we confronted with a skills gap going forward. So there is need for some of those ministries to employ, and we allocated some funding for that. We are also saying that there's also need to create opportunities. So you will find there is allocation of 6 billion, for example, for the 6 EPZs across the country, and I'm happy that Busia County is one of them that's benefiting from that funding. We are also saying that there is need for this feeding program to be expanded to accommodate the entire country, so that even members of parliament, we should be brought on board and engulfed, so that we also contribute matching funds, so that this feeding program can be taken in all parts of the country. Madam Honorable Speaker, we are also saying we have some MDS with overlapping mandates, that there is need for such departments be
Honorable members, I now propose the question that this House adopts the report of the Budget and Appropriations Committee on budget estimates for the national government, the judiciary, and Parliament for the financial year 2023-2024, laid on the table of the House on Tuesday, the 6th of June, 2023, and pursuant to the provisions of Article 221 of the Constitution, Section 39 of the Public Finance Act of 2012, and Standing Order number 239. 1. Approves the issuance of a sum of Kenya shillings 308,410,784,957 from the Consolidated Fund to meet the expenditure during the year ending 30th June 2024 in respect of the votes contained in the first schedule, subject to paragraph 3 of the Committee of Supply. 2. Roman 2. Makes the policy and financial resolutions as contained in the second schedule of the order paper. Roman 3. Orders that the Speaker do now leave the chair to facilitate the consideration of the said budget estimates with respect to each vote and program in the Committee of Supply as contemplated under Standing Order number 240, which is for the consideration of estimates in the Committee of Supply. The Honorable Chair of the Administration, the Honorable Chair of the Administration and Internal Security, the Honorable Gabriel Koshal Tongoyo.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the budget estimates were submitted to this House pursuant to Article 221 of the Constitution and Section 337, 38, and 9 of the Public Finance Management Act, as well as our standing orders. It is critical to note that appropriation of public resources is the sole responsibility of this House. Mr. Speaker, the standing orders number 235 of the National Assembly provide that the estimates, upon being laid in the House, are deemed to have been committed to respective departmental committees, after which the committee shall consider, discuss, and review the estimates according to their mandate and make recommendation to the Budget and Appropriation Committee within the 21 days of tabling. Mr. Speaker, based on that provision, I want to confirm that my committee took time and went through the estimates of the MDS within the purview of the committee pursuant to the Standing Order 216 and the second schedule of the same. Mr. Speaker, allow me to speak to some of the critical issues which were canvassed during the process. Mr. Speaker, under the National Police Service, my committee observed that the government had completed the construction of the NPS, that is the National Police Service Level 4 Hospital, along the Bangadi Road, majority of you must have seen, but had not been operationalized due to the lack of resources to procure drugs, parts for medical equipment, chemical, food ratio, and uniform, and the rest. The NPS was seeking for an additional 50 million toward this, but was not provided in the budget estimates. I'm happy that my committee rationalized the allocation across the MDS to provide for the 50 million to enable the NPS operationalize this hospital to give the needed service to our police officers. I believe that with this gesture from the committee and subsequent adoption of the report by the House, the hospital will soon be up and running. Mr. Speaker, the committee observed that service delivery by the Directorate of Criminal Investigation on the production of the Certificate of Good Conduct was hampered by the breakdown of the automated palm fingerprint identification system known as AFIS. Majority of us may probably have had a lot of complaint from the public, and they had resulted to manual. Mr. Speaker, we provided, the committee provided 106.3 million to cater for the same. Consequently, the Directorate of Criminal Investigation could not process certificate of good conduct for thousands of applicants. I think I had mentioned that. And I'm happy to note that my committee, while exercising their constitutional mandate, also rationalized the resources across the MDAs and realized the saving of the same amount to enable this critical service resume as soon as possible when the financial year begins. I think it's good to report good news. The service has been reverted as per even now. We managed, the DCI managed to negotiate on the promise that this money is going to be available. Mr. Speaker, my committee observed that the number of police officers was rapidly declining on account of natural attrition, but there was no allocation for the recruitment to replace such officers. There was a need to recruit 5,000 officers to replace the ones that have left the service and further boost their dwindling numbers, and the resources amounting to 3.3 billion for recruitment of an additional 5,000 officers could not be realized. And I hope that during the budget implementation, we will realize the savings and more resources to enable us embark on this critical exercise, which touches on our national security. Mr. Speaker, the inadequacy in resources allocation has also affected the critical Department of Migration, where thousands of Kenyans seeking for economic opportunities, medical treatment abroad could not secure passport due to the breakdown of the printer. The committee once again also provided the 70 million toward addressing this problem, that is purchasing high-density 2 printers. I'm also happy to note that the National Treasury has ascended to our advisory that the State Department, being one of the department generating revenue, be allowed to utilize some of the resources they generate to the exchequer. We welcome the move to allocate 1.3 billion as appropriation in aid to go toward alleviating the funding challenges facing the department. This gesture will accelerate service delivery as was promised by the Kenya Kwanza government. Mr. Speaker, the government over the years has gazetted new administrative units to enhance service delivery, mainly through creation of new sub-counties, location, and even sub-location and divisions. Unfortunately, there has been no corresponding resources to actualize this noble idea. I'm happy to inform this House that my committee provided 100 million to enable this new unit be operationalized. And I want also to so much appreciate the Budget and Appropriation Committee, because they had seen it fit also to add another 50 million to this sector as well, to take it to a tune of 150 million, Mr. Speaker. We are cognizant of the fact that even the unit which has been operationalized still face funding challenges. And I think that is admission, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, admission that the Budget and Appropriation Committee, having tabled a request, added further amount, actually totaling 200 million. Sorry, it was not 50, to take this to a total of 300 million. So majority of members, you know, in your sub-counties and your constituencies, some of the unit that has been gazetted, but we never realized the operationalization due to shortage of funds. At least it's good to announce that when you approve this, we will be able to be in a position to take these critical services to Mwananchi. Mr. Speaker, there are other critical areas which affected service delivery which could not be funded. These include the multi-agency, which undertaking operation in Mboni and North Rift and even Northeastern. We appealed to the Budget Appropriation Committee, and what we managed also to get from my committee, and 400 million was able to be allocated to the same. The program on acquisition of motor vehicles for the DCs, ACCs, through the leasing, which has not been provided for, and there was a need for about 1.4 billion for the same. The scale-up surveillance along the Kenya borders and region within the ethnic conflicts, mainly the cattle rustling, and implementation of the policy directive to crack down on illegal drugs and narcotics to the tune of 500 million, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, some sagas under the State Department for Internal Security were poorly funded, with the bulk of the resources channeled toward personal enrollment, leaving them with little resources for operationalization. Such sagas include the NACADA, the NGO Coordination Board, the Firearm Licensing Board, and the Private Regulatory Authority. It is good to announce to enable it to execute their mandate. The firearms, the committee managed to get small funds, 200 million, to add to what was already appropriated to the Firearms and Licensing Board, and 20 million to the betting control, respectively, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Kenyans in their constitutional right decided to create the National Police Service Commission and the Independent Policing Oversight Authority to enable them enhance policing services and oversight over the police. The two institutions, however, have remained underfunded in the key areas such as mobility, human resource, ICT equipment, among others, as annexed in this report of the Budget and Appropriation Committee, Mr. Speaker. It is our desire that as soon as we start collecting more revenue, these are some of the institutions that the budgetary allocation will have to be enhanced among other independent institutions. Mr. Speaker, the security sector is critical to the long-term sustainable development and the poverty alleviation by ensuring safe and fair system to enable people to work and the business to operate and thrive. Despite steps toward this reform, many challenges still exist in the effective implementation of the security sector reform, as was evident in the past through corruption, abduction, torture, disappearance, and the murder and extrajudicial killing, and the lack of effective oversight and accountability. To reverse this trend, I'm happy that the Kenya Kwanza government has successfully engaged security sector stakeholders to reorientate policing operation. This is an ushered in a new policing paradigm geared toward achieving a high level of security for citizens while observing their rights and freedom to the greatest extent. To strengthen the policing services, the government has executed the necessary instrument to actualize the financial independence of the National Police Service and the realization that is the substantive enabler of genuine institutional independence. The operational independence of the police is necessary for its efficiency, professionalism, and accountability. Further, the government established a task force on police reform, which we hope, as soon as they finish their work, we will start implementing the recommendation immediately by appropriating the necessary resources. And I think we all have had several occasions, the President talking about the ambitious modernization of the police service. Mr. Speaker, I support that the House adopt the proposed expenditure as contained in the program across the various votes as contained in this report. So having said this, Mr. Speaker, I once again want to say, to pass a lot of gratitude to the Budget and Appropriation Committee, which we appeared before, for doing an exemplary good job. They have really tried to balance, despite the challenges, the competing interest. I think the budget as presented is well balanced. So I support. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The MP for Uriri. Nyamita.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I also rise to support this bill. First, Mr. Speaker, this particular bill is the first one of this government. And I want to agree with the chair of the budget committee that this particular budget is made during a very challenging time. One, when the when the country has actually been downgraded, our debt status has actually been downgraded. We issued a local bond that has been undersubscribed. The banking sector is also facing quite a bit of challenge. And there is also political tension, not to mention the Ukraine war that is also affecting us all across. So really what are Kenyans looking into, Mr. Speaker? One is that this particular budget will set the stage for this particular government in terms of what we expect over the next 5 years. And if there are then any corrective measures, such indicators must be picked within this particular budget. However, Mr. Speaker, I want to say that whereas we congratulate the committee and the various departmental committees for the work they put in, I have had the occasion to peruse through the report. We haven't seen the inclusion of what we call the citizens' input. During the sector hearings, Mr. Speaker, the public normally come in and give their wish, and this actually is supposed to be captured within this particular budget. We have seen that the committee, however, did undertake public participation in various countries across the country. But Mr. Speaker, you might want to know that even the projects that we did include in the last particular budget, in the last budget that's ending this financial in this particular month, have not been implemented. And it would be bad for us as a house that we go and do public participation without necessarily taking into account even one or two things. So we do hope that the items and the feedback that this particular committee picked out when they did public participation, they actually are going to capture them. Mr. Speaker, the revenue projections as indicated in this particular budget show an increase of about 17%, which I find a bit unrealistic because, you know, traditionally you've seen our GDP is growing by 10% every year on year. So when you do about 17%, it may appear a bit unrealistic, and that can only add to the deficit, which then we have to rationalize during the supplementary. So I don't know what maybe the Finance Committee will be representing to us when they do, because I know the revenue projections of 2.5 trillion might be a bit unrealistic, considering the background upon which this budget is actually being done. Mr. Speaker, today, and this is very important for members of this House, the disbursement of CDF is way below 50%. Whereas we have got commitment, which we are yet to actualize from the ministry, from the Treasury, that they're going to release CDF for this financial year coming to an end. We are being realistic to note that they might not be able to release the whole amount. And I actually want to urge my colleagues that if the full amount of CDF for the year 2022-2023 is not released by the end of this particular financial year, that very arrears must be captured within this particular budget. Because in the absence of the arrears being captured in this particular budget, it means that we will have to wait for a further supplementary whose date we do not know, and we are likely to suffer. So I'm hoping that before we go into the Committee of Supply, Mr. Speaker, that the Treasury would have come back to us with the exact amount that they're actually releasing, and the balance of which, that on this particular floor, we may be able to amend and include in this particular one. Going into a bit of the specifics, Mr. Speaker, in the Ministry of ICT, under what we call the Government Advertising Agency, today the government continues to spend a lot of money. And they spend money advertising MyGov through an insert in daily newspapers. And they pay a lot of money, sometimes between 18 to 24 million every single week. There used to be the Audit Bureau of Circulation in the Postal Corporation, a unit which died. There is no value for that particular money, because if you ask MyGov how many newspapers Nation Media, when they do an insert, how many newspapers does Nation Media distribute every particular week, they cannot tell you. They will rely on what the printing house is actually telling them. So there is no proper monitoring and evaluation. And sometimes they do even an insert in the People Daily. Mr. Speaker, of a report that I saw that was done by the sector shows that, you know, a paper like the People Daily has only 3% of the market share, of what you call the newspaper market share. When you give them and you pay them 18 million, it's actually not giving us value. We are investing a lot in ICT, and we want to ask that maybe to give value to the taxpayers, that going forward, there needs to be a monitoring mechanism so that we know whether the money that we're actually putting in advertisement serves its purpose. Speaking about which, Mr. Speaker, we continue to spend a lot of money in maintaining the NOFB network across the country. And we know, and my colleagues will agree, that even in our sub-county headquarters, that NOFB network is not actually working. If you actually total the amount of money that we are using in the maintenance, we are almost equaling the amount of money that we have used to put up the same infrastructure. Maybe it is also something for them to be able to do. The money for old people, the old people in this country, year in, year out, continue to cry that the money is not coming in good time. I sit in the Committee on Social Protection, and we have challenged the ministry, and we are hoping that the money that we're giving them this time, even before they begin dispersing it, can they present to this House a list by constituency of the existing beneficiaries, the ones who've been listed who are not benefiting, and the ones who are actually exiting. And that becomes, if possible, a quarterly report, so that we can monitor that against how much then we allocate them through this particular project. I want to finally, Mr. Speaker, support one of the policy initiatives that I saw in this particular report that says the money that we're giving to the Ministry of Education for infrastructure funding be given to CDF as a conditional grant, because actually it is intended for our schools. So all that money, if it is about 5 billion, I'm yet to check the exact figure, Mr. Speaker, can be distributed across each and every constituency, and we use the model of CDF because that is the model that actually has worked. And with those very many remarks, Mr. Speaker, I beg to support, sorry. Thank you.
MP for Molo, Korea. Chair of the Finance Committee. Proceed. Proceed.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I don't usually call me the chairman of the Finance Bill. I'm the chairman of the Finance and National Planning Committee. But of course, the issues around the country.
Not the Finance Bill, the Finance Committee.
Okay.
How can you be the chairman of the Finance Bill?
That's what I had. But this discussion has, one of the things that we are very happy about is that we've turned around the conversation about the Finance Bill. I was in the village over the weekend, and my constituents were asking, where did this Finance Bill come from? It has never been there. Because we endeavor to do the most public participation, to have members of the public give us their views. And Honorable Speaker, this afternoon, we are retreating to do our report, which we hope we table next week on Tuesday. Honorable Speaker, I'm here to support the motion that has been proposed by the Chair of the Budget and Appropriations Committee. And as he and the Vice Chairperson has rightfully put, the Committee on Finance and National Planning and the Committee on Budget Appropriations are like conjoined twins, because their work is to appropriate, then the work of the Committee on Finance and National Planning is to raise the revenues. And Honorable Speaker, when we do public participation on budget, it's usually a very smooth and happy exercise, because Kenyans are saying we want roads, we want electricity in our homes, we want water in our homesteads, we want medicine in our hospitals, we want our youth getting employed. But Honorable Speaker, when you do public participation on how to finance the good things that they want, that's where the rain starts beating us. But Honorable Speaker, we are up to the task, and we'll make sure that the deficit that is being proposed by this particular proposal for the estimates, we try to bring down that deficit as much as possible. Because we are agreeing as a country, we have borrowed enough. We cannot rely on borrowing to fund our development. We must raise our revenues. Honorable Speaker, when we are going out there, even when we are trying to borrow, we are being asked, what is your capacity? Just like the banks will ask you, show me your bank statements. Let me see how much turnover you have in your bank account. The same applies to our country, Honorable Speaker, and that is why we're working day and night to make sure that we finance our budget and we raise as many resources locally as we possibly can. I'll take a few minutes to just highlight, and I just pick two issues. And one is the Committee on Finance and National Planning is concerned about the huge balances that are held by several MDAs and SAGAs across the government. We have funds that are being allocated to departments for particular purposes, and when they delay, then you have those particular monies earning interest. And these are the expense of other MDAs that probably would have a more urgent need of absorbing those particular funds. And I'm happy that when we made this presentation to the Budget and Appropriations Committee, they have given us a mandate to look at all balances that are held in the bank accounts of all government agencies, and where such balances should not be in those accounts, they should be returned to the National Treasury or they be absorbed, because we cannot be borrowing money when our agencies are actually earning interest in the bank for the same monies, which is actually taxpayers' money, because our PFM Act, Honorable Speaker, gives the mandate of holding public funds only to the Principal Secretary of the National Treasury. Honorable Speaker, we are going towards the end of the year, and every time we get towards the end of the year, it is a spending spree for all government agencies because of the accounting system we use as a country. Because, Honorable Speaker, we are using the cash accounting system where we expense as we get the money from Exchequer. And as a result, that's why you find most of MDs now are trying as much as possible to do all the procurement they can to try to spend the money before the end of the year. And you find this even more during the end of a regime. Like at the end of every 5 years, you find at the end of 5 years, when new governments come in, whether it's the national government or the county government, the first thing they tell you they're doing is auditing pending bills. So why do we have to stay as a country where it's like we wind up our country after every 5 years and we get a new country after that's 5 years? And the way to fix this, Honorable Speaker, is already outlined in our PFM Act about Section 81 and Section 164, about use of a accrual accounting system instead of cash accounting system. And one of the highlights the Committee of National Planning has done is to allocate resources, 400 million shillings, to the Public Sector Accounting Board to migrate all our accounting system as a country and all our sagas from cash accounting system to accrual accounting system, so that we stop this haste spending towards the end of the year. We stop this tedious and pain-striking experience after the end of 5 years that we subject our contractors and our service providers to. Honorable Speaker, we have allocated funds for the development of the third marginalization policy. And we are hoping, and in addition also adding an extra 3 billion shillings to the equalization fund. We appreciate that there are around 34 counties that are really, really marginalized. And you're really hoping that these monies that have been allocated to these particular counties are actually going to bridge that marginalization gap so that their development can come to par with the other counties. But you're also saying, Honorable Speaker, that there are other pockets of marginalized areas across the country. If you look at the GDP of Nairobi, if you look at the per capita income of Nairobi, it's going to be the highest. But you'll find places or people that are living in absolute poverty, where they do not have clean water, where they do not have schools, where they do not have electricity. And Honorable Speaker, we are hoping that the Commission on Revenue Allocation is going to come up with a third marginalization policy that will ensure that these other marginalized areas across the country actually also get to benefit from these particular funds. Lastly, Honorable Speaker, we've asked Kenyans to help us raise revenues because we do not want to borrow to finance the budget. But what Kenyans are also asking us, Honorable Speaker, is will these monies be spent for the purposes that you are telling us are going to be spent? Kenyans are angry about the wastages in public sector. Kenyans are tired for the theft that has been in the public sector. And they're saying, we are willing to pay, yes, but can we make sure that this money is spent correctly? And for this, Mr. Speaker, I would like to congratulate His Excellency the President for, first of all, cracking the whip on those that have been found to misappropriate public funds, Mr. Speaker. Because this will go a long way in giving confidence to Kenyans that the taxes that you're going to give, that they're going to collect from them, is actually going to be spent for the correct purposes. And my clarion call, this House is mandated to oversight the executive. All the departmental committees, all the oversight committees, please make sure we put these government officials to account so that this hand-earned money of Kenyans that we are collecting as their taxes is spent for the correct purpose, for the better of our motherland, Kenya. In that, Mr. Speaker, I support.
The woman rep for Mombasa, Zamzam Chimba.
Asante sana Bwana Spika, na mimi nimefuatilia kwa kina bajeti hii ambayo imetengezwa na kamati ya bajeti. Lakini kuna mambo ambayo najiuliza maswali mengi, na nafikiri mengine yamegusiwa na mheshimiwa ambaye amemaliza kuongea. Toka tumeingia katika serikali hii miezi 6 iliyopita, tukiangalia KRA walikusanya 1.5 trillion kwa miezi 6. Lakini bado tunaona NHIF wanadai bilioni 20. Tukiangalia katika shule za public schools wanadai bilioni 28. Wazee wa mitaa pia hawakusazwa, wanadai bilioni 10. County governments ambao ni gatuzi wanadai bilioni 99. Na kuangalia kule wanavyokopa hizi pesa, pia wamekopa pia bilioni 689. Kitu ambacho mimi najiuliza, hizi pesa huenda wapi? Pengine kamati mtafanya bajeti, tunapiga bajeti vizuri, tunaangalia kuwa hizi pesa zikikusanywa ziweze kusaidia mwananchi wa Kenya. Lakini yale mashimo ambayo yako katika taifa hili, yale mashimo ambayo yako ndani ya KRA, yale mashimo ambayo yako ndani ya maofisi ya umma, hizi pesa huwa hazifiki kwenye huduma ambazo ni malengwa. Na mimi nataka niseme hivi, kila mwaka tutakuwa sisi twakaa tufanya bajeti, na kila mwaka tutakuwa tuingia katika mifuko ya Wakenya, tunachimba mifuko ya Wakenya, tunawanyang'anya pesa zao, lakini hizi pesa ikifika kwenye matumizi haijulikani pesa zimetumika vipi. Nimeona amezungumzia mambo ya migration pale mheshimiwa, akasema kuwa wametoa bajeti ya kuweza kutengeneza haya mashine. Mimi nataka nikuelezee, niko katika gatuzi ambayo iko na immigration office, na wananchi haswa ndani ya Mombasa wanahangaika sana. Siku na kipande mashine imeharibika, siku na kipande mashine imeharibika, enda tengezwa sijui Pakistan, sijui enda tengezwa India. Mimi nataka nijue, ikiwa vitu hivi huwa vinabajetiwa, kwa nini isinunuliwe mashini mara moja, iwe mashini ambayo itatoa huduma wananchi wakienda kutafuta pasipoti, kwa sababu wengi wanatafuta ajira kule nje, wengi wanaenda kutibiwa, na pia hata pale migration kwenyewe. Mheshimiwa, mimi nataka niseme Mheshimiwa Spika kuwa wananchi wanapewa foleni mrefu ya miezi 6, miezi 5 kwenda kupigwa picha tu, na hii yote ni kwa sababu wizi umekithiri katika maofisi ya umma. Wizi umekithiri na wananchi ndio wanaumia. Itakuwa sisi tunaletewa bajeti kama hizi kila mwaka, lakini pesa hatuelewi zenda vipi. Na mwananchi ni punda amechoka. Punda amechoka, kwa sababu hata tukisema sisi hatutaki kuomba, lakini tujiulize, yale mapeni tulikuwa tunaomba sisi tulitumia sawa sawa, ama tulikuwa tuiba haya mapeni kisha tuarudi kuambia mwananchi kuwa hatuwezi kuomba, itabidi uingie katika mfuko wako utoe ushuru, kisha akitoa ushuru tena turudi tena tuwaibie hizo pesa. Ni wakati serikali ichukue msimamo. Tukizidi kufinya wananchi, na serikali yoyote inayotoza wananchi wake ushuru wa juu, si serikali ambayo inapata maendeleo. Kwa sababu serikali nyingi ambazo zimeendelea ni serikali ambazo ziliweka ushuru chini, zikaweza kuzidisha mazao, wananchi wakaja kupata mapato ya kutosha, na kisha kutokana na mapato wakawa hata na kufuraha ya ile kutoa ushuru wa zaidi katika serikali. Lakini sasa sisi nikiangalia hapa, tunaomba zaidi, tunakopa zaidi, lakini huyu mwananchi ndio anakuja kulipa kwa mfuko wake kila siku. Inasikitisha sana Mheshimiwa Spika. Ni wakati jumba hili lianze kuangalia zile cases ambazo tulikuwa nazo za corruption. Watu wameiba pesa, watu wamebadhiri pesa sehemu, zinachunguzwa na zinamalizika. Sio kuwa majopo yanatengezwa kila siku, bajeti ilipitishwa, watu wakaiba, majopo yanatengezwa kila siku, kisha yanaenda baridi, hakuna anayeshikwa, hakuna anayechukuliwa hatua, hakuna anayeregesha hizi pesa. Itakuwa pesa sisi kila mwaka kamati ya bajeti inatoa bajeti, lakini pesa hazijulikani zinaenda vipi. Na mimi nataka kuelezea kamati ya bajeti, kweli naona mmejaribu kufanya kazi nzuri, hasa sisi kina mama wa kaunti 47. Tunajivunia hiyo 1 billion, manake tumeitafuta sana na pesa zetu zilikuwa ziko chini sana. Tunawashukuru katika hilo, lakini ningependa kuona zaidi katika bajeti hii muwe mmeweka pesa ya kuweza kupeleka maji Turukana, pesa ya kuweza kupeleka maji Northeastern, ili tuweze kukabiliana na njaa, hawa wananchi waweze kulima mashamba, waweze kutoa mazao, wanyama wapate maji ya kunywa, ili uchumi uweze kupanda juu. Manake kila mwaka kule Turukana, Northeastern na sehemu ya majanga tunapata watu wanakufa na baa la njaa. Nilifikiria na nikatamani sana muweke katika bajeti yenu, muweke hesabu ya kuweza kupeleka maji sehemu zile ili tuweze kuzalisha zaidi. Na ningependa kusema pia, nimemsikia mheshimiwa akisema kuwa amezungumzia kuwa kuna kazi, mambo ya ukosefu wa ajira, na wale ambao wanahudumu katika maofisi ya taifa, maofisi ya serikali, wengi wako ni watu wazima wamezeeka. Mimi nauliza hivi, ikiwa watoto wetu watakuwa wanaenda wanasomea masomo ya uhandisi, masomo ya ufundi, masomo tofauti tofauti, kwa nini tusiwapatie mwanya wa kuweza kuingizwa katika makazi haya ambao watu wamehudumu miaka mingi, wamezeeka, ili hawa waliozeeka tuwachukue kama wale wa kuwafunza hawa na kuwa oversight, kuangalia kazi zao zinaenda vipi, wakishika vizuri hawa wazee tuwatoe, tuwape mgao wao, warudi nyumbani, waweze kujiangalia, na hawa vijana ambao tumewasomesha waweze kupata hizi ajira. Katika sekta nyingi, Mheshimiwa Spika, wazee wamebaki pale muda mrefu, mpaka hata ikifika anakwenda hakuna mtu wa kumchukua. Lakini katika bajeti wanasema kwa sababu ya unemployment wanajaribu kutafuta mwanya wa kuingiza hao vijana. Mwanya utapatikana ikiwa sisi tutawapa vijana nafasi na tuweze kuwapa msukumo katika bajeti wa kuweza kuwasaidia ili wapate masomo zaidi, wakiingia pale waweze kuhudumia taifa. Na mimi ningesema hivi, kuomba, watu wameomba sana pesa nje. Tumeangalia miradi mingi ya serikali, na naona katika miradi ambayo imesomwa hapa, miradi mingi Bwana Spika ya serikali imekaa kule, yani zimezembea, zimekaa tu. Watu, kuna mijengo imejengwa, imetumia pesa ya serikali, lakini haitumiki, haifanyi kazi. Na kuna watu mahali ambao wanahitaji zile pesa zilizotumika katika hizi miradi zingeweza kusaidia sehemu nyingine ambayo ingeweza kuinua uchumi zaidi. Kwa hiyo miradi kama hii, kama alivyosema, pengine hawa wanaomba wanataka wapate dump, hawa wanaomba wanataka sijui project gani, kisha unapata pesa kidogo inawekwa pale ambayo ni makadirio, na ile bajeti yake ilikuwa ni pesa kubwa, ingine inawekwa kwenye mradi mwingine mdogo, na unapata miradi hii haiishi. Kwa hiyo Bwana Spika, mimi ningesema katika kamiti ya bajeti, ekeni mradi mmoja, tuangalie huu mradi mmoja mpaka uishe, uanze kufanya kazi, kisha tuweze kubajetia mradi mwingine wa pili, nao pia uanze kufanya kazi. Tukienda hivi taratibu, itakuwa sisi hizi pesa hatuzibadhiri. Lakini kila siku kuingia kwa mfuko wa Mkenya, na yule Mkenya ambaye nafaa inuke, tunamuomba pesa, tunachimba zaidi, kisha pesa tunakuja tunazitumia vibaya, itakuwa sisi kweli hatuna uaminifu kwa wananchi wa Kenya. Na nikisoma hapa, tumewekewa katika bango hili, tumeandika for the welfare of society and the just government of the people. Jumba hili linatakiwa liweze kumsimamia Mkenya, liweze kumhurumia Mkenya, liweze kuweka bajeti ambayo itakuwa friendly kwa Mkenya, sio bajeti ambayo itakuja kumuumiza Mkenya. Naona mmebonyeza kidude, kwa hiyo mimi nitamalizia hapa Bwana Spika nikisema bajeti ni nzuri, ila kidogo wafanye marekebisho wasiweze kuingia sana kwa mifuko ya Kenya. Asante sana Bwana Spika.
The Chair of the Agricultural Committee, the Honorable Mutunga MP for Tigania West.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker, for the opportunity to also contribute to this debate. Honorable Speaker, I would like to thank the members of the Agriculture Committee for looking through the BPAs and also scrutinizing the budget and rationalizing what we think could be done in the next financial year. Honorable Speaker, I would also like to thank the Budget and Appropriation Committee for receiving our report and for interrogating our report in a positive sense and finding it necessary for us to be supported in one way or another. Honorable Speaker, looking at the agricultural sector in this country, the agricultural sector is the supporter of over 75% of the population. Most of the people live in agriculture, or they derive their livelihood in agriculture, and therefore it means that without supporting this sector properly in the budget, we are not doing the right thing. It is also the main foreign exchange earner in the country. It is also the main employer of most of the people, especially those who are engaged in informal sector employment. And it provides the best avenue for us to feed ourselves. A country that cannot feed itself is not a country that can call itself proudly sovereign. Honourable Speaker, when you look at the bottom-up economic model that is being used, promoted, or rather which is the core concern of the current government, out of the 9 value chains that have been picked as the beta value chains to drive the economy, 6 of them are in agriculture. Having seen that, when I look at the budget, and as members of the budget and our professional, as the members of the agriculture committee, we were unable to make huge adjustments in this budget. The issue being that very little money has been allocated to agriculture. Kenya is signatory to the Maputo Protocol. Kenya was there 10 years later to basically sign off the Malabo Declaration, which has specific targets. Kenya is being assessed every 2 years under the Comprehensive African Agriculture Development Program, where we always are given below average assessment in overall, because we are not funding agriculture the way it should be funded. Honourable Speaker, agriculture is number 8 priority out of 10, which means we miss basically putting money in other sectors. Looking at the budget, Honourable Speaker, and before we even allocate the resources, I think the question is, what does agriculture do for this country, besides the few that I've just mentioned? Over the last 1 year, we have realized serious achievements within the ministry, or within the sector itself. We have realized achievements in animal health, where we have graduated many students who are becoming private sector players in supporting the industry. There is a lot of improvement in terms of the veterinary surveillance and vaccination. We have seen a lot of improvement in the testing of the milk so that we can have clean milk and good milk for consumption. Still in the livestock sector, we have seen a lot of production of the semen and packaging of the semen, and also establishment of liquid nitrogen, so that we may produce liquid nitrogen plants that may produce enough to distribute the semen across the country, which means we are trying to improve our dairy hand as a country which is a center of excellence for dairy. We also moved the technology further into sex semen, where we can produce what we want, if it is females or males, and also upgraded it further to the point where we can actually transport embryos. So we are saying the sector is key and important, and is modernized in the sense that we have the best scientists in the country anchored in this particular sector. On the other hand, the crop sector has also improved a lot over the last 1 year, and I don't need to mention the specific improvements. But Honourable Speaker, we have serious deficit in the budget. The budget presented to us by the ministry, by the sector, was 104 billion shillings. We were only able to give them 64 billion shillings, which means we have a deficit of 40 billion shillings. This deficit is key in terms of slashing out or reducing the allocations to the various sectors and the allocations to the various functions and activities within the sector itself. When you look at that reduction, specific scrutiny into the crop sector, subsector, the crop will suffer in terms of recurrent 20.7 billion reduction, and the livestock, and in terms of development, 16.4 billion. That means around 37.16 billion is going to be is the reduction that we are seeing. When you come to the crops, the livestock sector, Honourable Speaker, we have a huge reduction again, where we are fall short of the budget by around 4 billion, whereby the total now ends up to 40 billion. Honourable Speaker, the reason why I'm emphasizing on this is because this is the sector that feeds the nation. This is the sector which has the key to developing this country very fast. This is the sector where most of the people are anchored. And this sector has not really gotten the right scrutiny. And this is the sector which will drive the bottom-up economic agenda of this particular country. So we have deficit, not so much of the surplus. On the other hand, we have serious also issues in terms of pending bills. In this sector, we have pending bills in the agriculture sector amounting to 16.9. And I know the principle or the law states that the pending bills are the first charge. If we allocated 16.9 billion into paying the pending bills, then there would be no activities within the agricultural sector, the crop section for that year. On the other hand, the livestock sector has got another pending bills of totaling to 4.6 billion, and with the budget deficit of 2.8 billion, the total goes to 7.8. Having said that, Honourable Speaker, we didn't rationalize wherever it was possible. We looked at which of these sectors have sagas that are making profit, and we singled out several sagas which are either breaking even or making profit. And I wish to mention the Kenya Seed Company is one of them. The Kenya Meat Commission is nearing the making profit. Agriculture and Food Authority is also, making some profit, and so on and so forth. So some of them are able to stand on their own. Still within the same sector, we have SAGAs, or semi-autonomous government agencies, that require support and therefore need some budgetary support. I may wish to mention that most of the sugar millers, which are public, will need support. I want to single out a sugar milling company called the South Nyanza, the sugar milling company, which requires around 1.2 billion to be supported in. In this issue, Honourable Speaker, we've not been able to do much, and in that respect, then the budget has not probably been able to respond effectively to the sector. But the question is, why shouldn't the private millers make profit and the public millers are not making profit? We have made it our business as a committee to visit all those millers, the sugar milling companies, and we have been able to be appraised on the issues that they are going through. Some of them have got historical debts that they are addressing right now. Some of them have got renovation and the improvement issues that they are going through. And this is what has really caused some of those issues. However, we are seeing we are seeing light at the end of the tunnel in the sense that some of the sagas within the agricultural sector have been able to make profit. In conclusion, Honourable Speaker, because I would like to probably create time for my colleagues to also make contributions, we have made budget proposals. And these budget proposals, we have rationalized, looked at where do we put money where it will have maximum output and maximum impact. Within the livestock sector, within the agricultural sector, we have also looked at that. We have also looked at which sagas can support themselves, and therefore we leave them, win them off, and which ones are likely to be giving government money. And then we need a serious scrutiny on these sagas so that we can be able to classify them accordingly. In terms of where we are putting money, we have looked at, we have been able to win off the Kenya Meat Commission. We have been able to win off the sugar, the Kenya Seed Company and others. But we have been able to look at also how can we address the issue of the pending bills. And I want to thank the Budget and Appropriation Committee for considering to start payment of some of these pending bills. Some of the pending bills have been there for very many years, since 1970s. And some have been even concluded, they have gone to court, we have court awards, and these court awards are already negotiated downwards, and they have been pending without being paid. But now, we have seen some light in that direction, where some of the pending bills have been awarded. I want to single out as a case of the last year's maize flour subsidy. We have been looking at this maize flour subsidy. Yesterday, the committee adopted our report on the maize flour subsidy. I know many Kenyans have not seen the 100 shillings, 2 kilogram packets of maize flour last year, and we were able to isolate who did what and whose packaging can we follow all the way to the end. Some of them were not clear towards the end of the value chain, and I'll be presenting this report in this house so that we can discuss the report. But at the end of the day, we did clear out the small-scale maize millers who were able to sell their maize even at their factories where they opened up retail centers within their factories, and they sold this meal at 100 shillings, and we had evidence that it was sold. On the other hand, we were not able to clear the large-scale millers because they did not give us sufficient evidence, and the figures were not tallying, as it were. Finally, Honourable Speaker, I want to raise an issue in view of making money in this country. We need to raise a lot of money in order to support what can give us the revenue. Agriculture has the potential to give us sufficient revenue. Agriculture has the potential to give us sufficient jobs in this country. Agriculture has potential to also give us foreign exchange. So if we put money into this sector, then we can be able to basically improve this and develop this country faster. But we cannot say we put in money when we don't have money. That is why revenue generation is very important, and that is why any measures that the government come up with needs to be looked into and supported so that we are able to raise enough money to be able to support our economy and our sectors as it were. Honourable Speaker, with those very few remarks, I wish to support. Thank you very much.
Thank you. You saved some few minutes. I think if chairs don't take as many as the 15 minutes that you are entitled to, and other members also take less than the 10 minutes they're entitled to, we'll have to be able to get so many people to participate in this. But of course, that's the discretion of everybody. The chair has no authority over that. Meli. He is the chair of communication.
Education.
Education. No. Anyway, you are lucky you got it because I thought you are a farmer and you should weigh in a little bit, because I'm doing right now an intercession. Every time a chair contributes, I would want to allow an opportunity to another member to. Yes. If you are a farmer, proceed. But
yes,
of course, you'll spend all your time, including the chair's time.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker, for this time. And Honourable Speaker, before I begin my presentation on education, I just want to thank the chair of Budget and Appropriation Committee and the entire Budget Committee for the work well done. Honourable Speaker, actually the Budget and Appropriation Committee has a big task of ensuring that the tax raised by the Finance and Planning Committee of the National Assembly are well utilized, are well distributed, equitably across the country and across the various sectors. But the sector that has taken the huge chunk of that particular money is the Department of Education and Training. Honourable Speaker, in the 2023-2024 budget, the department has been allocated 628 billion shillings, which accounts 27% of the total national government budget. Mr. Speaker, this points out that the current government has a lot of importance on education as a sector in recognition of the central role the sector plays in supporting socio-economic development agenda. Honourable members, I think we all know that education is very central to our country, and more so to the socio-economic development of our nation. Mr. Speaker, the various areas of spending which have been given priority in the education sector budget are, amongst others, the provision of resources to support the free primary and secondary education as well as junior secondary schools. Honourable members, you need to know that the government has been continuing this issue of capitation to schools from the year 2008. The successive governments have actually tried to increase that budget from 10,000, from 8,000 in the year 2008, 10,000 by around 2010, and now we have a figure of almost 22,000. For JSS, we have actually a budget of 15,000. This is to enable the schools to run and to buy the essentials which are actually going on those schools. I want to laud the committee because, as earlier presented, the committee had a deficit of almost 10 billion, but the budget committee assented or agreed to our pleas and actually added the money to this sector, which actually takes almost 90 billion of the government's spending in basic education. The other area is school infrastructure improvement and to support the CBC. This is an area where we actually agreed with the ministry that the National Government Constitutional Development Fund will actually work together with the ministry so that some of the allocation infrastructure will be placed in your constituencies so that it can actually assist in the development of schools across the country. And actually this one, Honorable Speaker, has been agreed to, and actually some of the infrastructure money will be taken directly to constituencies and will be oversighted by members of parliament. There is also funding to various universities, which I know very well that it is very important, and I shall be pointing out areas where actually the government or the committee sat down and looked at it, that private universities had actually gotten an undue advantage over the public universities, and we reduced their expenditures. We have also resources to Higher Education Loans Board to support students in both universities and TVET institutions, and on this particular case, we have actually increased funding for the Higher Education Loans Board by about 15 billion to almost 30 billion shillings. This is actually to accommodate the issue of the new financing model, and I think you all know, members, that the previous mode of financing, which were relying on grants, and grants that were not actually very specific. Right now, we are talking about student-centered fees in form of scholarships, in form of loans, and in forms of parental or family contribution. So in this case, that particular amount of money to Higher Education Loans Board and also through the University Funding Board has been increased substantially to take care of students at the universities and also in the TVET institutions. We also have quite a big amount of money in the recruitment of teachers, training of teachers on CBC, and support towards the implementation of the new curriculum. Honorable Speaker, the issue of teacher recruitment is very dear to the Kenya Kwanza government, especially on the issue of recruiting 116,000 teachers in the next 5 years. That's why in this financial year, the government is recruiting over 20,000 teachers, again, for actually to make sure that we reduce the number of teacher shortage in the Republic. We've also have the issue of skilling or retooling the teachers on competency-based curriculum. I think you all know that a number of teachers were actually schooled in the old system of the 844, but now there'll be need to have a lot of seminars, in-service programs to ensure that these teachers are retooled, to ensure that they support that. Mr. Speaker, in terms of sources of funding, the sector largely relies on direct government funding. Over 80% of the money in this sector relies on government funding, actually very little foreign funding. There are also some aspects of support from the development partners, especially in TVET. I think you all know that many TVET institutions, especially on the machinery and even the equipment, we get a lot of it from partner funding, like the Chinese concessions or the Chinese government loans. Mr. Speaker, the proposed allocation to the sector is also well aligned to the bottom-up economic transformation agenda of the government. A total of 20.2 billion for better programs and priorities have been allocated across the sector. I think this is actually very clear, especially in terms of trying to uplift the low income, the low-placed members of the education sector, and this has even been seen in the need to promote the teachers. Mr. Speaker, the better priorities in the education sector, that is the bottom-up economic transformation agenda, is as follows. We have the construction of 52 TTIs. That is 52 new TTIs at a cost of 890 million. This one actually will provide skills to the youth that we so much are in the public, and we really actually require them to get skills so that they can be self-employed. Training of youths on digital skills will cost 120 million. ICT infrastructure to support competency-based based assessment, 53 million. Construction of integrated resource centers at 1.4 billion shillings, and then construction of JSS classrooms at 2 billion shillings. JSS learners capitation has been increased to 25 billion, and support to establishment of Open University of Kenya at a cost of 170 million. This is quite important, especially the Open University is quite important, especially to enable Kenyans access higher education cheaply, even from the comfort of their homes, because this one actually intends to promote the online learning system or the virtual systems, and therefore enable Kenyans to access this. Honorable Speaker, as part of our role in the oversight mandate on the budget matters also, I want to point out that some of the few key issues of concern with the committee observed and which they require concrete policy direction on how to address some of them, which the committee made a number of recommendations. Honorable Speaker, I want to say that as a Committee of Education, we noted a number of issues. And as a committee, we asked the ministry to look into certain policy issues. And as an oversight committee, I want to thank our members of the committee for pointing out quite certain issues that were common in the, were actually glaring in the sector. One is there are quite a number of teachers in the teaching service who have stagnated in one job group for a long time. Honorable Speaker, as far as the teaching service takes a lot of money, more than half the money of this particular sector is in teacher salaries and remuneration. Many of them have actually stagnated, and they need about 2.2 billion to be promoted. And you know the importance of having a motivated staff or a motivated worker. Two, the committee also note there are quite a number of TVET institutions which have considered in offering business and management-related courses. TVET courses are supposed to provide skills like construction, electricals, painting, and all that. But a number of them have gone back to the business courses, procurement, business management, and all this. Actually, this is not the intention of the business, the TVET institutions. The TVET institution is supposed to provide skills, manpower, and actually equip the learner for the job market. But if you give them again the business courses, that is a need. We ask them to really look into it. The other issue is that 780 million had been allocated towards construction of TTIs in the remaining constituencies. We do not have TVET institutions. Through this allocation, 15 TTIs will be constructed and are envisaged to be completed in 2023-2024. The committee appreciates the model adopted in funding the remaining TTIs. However, we have a number of TTIs that are not completed. And as a committee, we sat down and actually looked for resources to ensure that we can't start new TTIs and leave others which are incomplete. And therefore, we got some resources and we allocated money to ensure that all the TTIs that have been constructed are completed and are in working condition. Most TVET instructors also, Honorable Speaker, we realize that do not have pedagogy or skills of teaching. Most of them have basics only in their first degree or graduate. That is either electrical engineering, but they require a pedagogical skill as a postgraduate diploma, maybe in electrical engineering, so that he understands how to transmit knowledge and to be able to teach in the classrooms. Honorable Speaker, we also noted that with the introduction of CBC curriculum, the number of primary school learners have reduced from grade 8, now they are in grade 6, and we ask the Ministry of Education, therefore, to uphold the 1,400 shillings that they have been giving and still retain it across the sector, and therefore make it 2,000 shillings. And therefore, we ask that let capitation in primary schools be increased from 1,450 to 2,000 shillings. The committee also concerned that free primary education capitation has been disbursed to primary schools outside the NEMIS, which we actually discouraged. And even in TVET, we ask that let every child have a number so that to avoid corruption and to avoid misuse of public resources. So in this case, we ask the Ministry of Education to stick to NEMIS and also TVET to ensure that every learner in TVET institutions has a number, has an admission, and we are able to account for the sense that we give them. Lastly, Honorable Speaker, there is an allocation of 300 million for the recruitment of field quality assurance officers. These are critical, and also for the purchase of vehicles. Honorable Speaker, we say that as much as the ministry spends around 90 billion in capitation, about 5 billion in construction of schools, there is poor monitoring and evaluation across the schools. So we actually agreed that they buy vehicles so that all the sub-counties across the country have officers that are recruited so that they are able to move around the schools, move around the institutions, and they are able to quality and assure all those particular schools and have value for our money. Honorable Speaker, we also noted that in the next cycle of placement, a new funding model will be placed at the universities. That is why we asked the the Budget and Appropriation Committee to increase funding to universities so that the students who are poor and disadvantaged will be able to be funded 100%, especially the orphans. Those are from very poor and vulnerable homes will get the money. However, Honorable Speaker, we realize also that there was allocation to two historical institutions in the sector. That is the Mtiani House. It was allocated about 350 million, and the KICD. Honorable Speaker, noting that the two institutions have actually this project stagnated for almost 10 years, we decided to reallocate the resources because they cannot make good use of them. The Mitiani House has been in construction since 1986, and the KICD since 2010. And every other time, they are asking for resources which they cannot actually show good use for them. Lastly, we say that we ask that the director of budget, the auditor general, supposed to audit the two institutions to ensure that public money is made good use, is actually have value for. Lastly, Honorable Speaker, I want to commend especially the work that has been done quite well by the Budget and Appropriation Committee, and also ask that as we support this particular budget, we have a number of issues which I want to point out for 1 minute, Honorable Speaker, especially the issue of importation, the way the chair of Budget and Appropriation Committee has said. If this country doesn't take it seriously, it will be a net importer of almost everything. More so, maize, vegetable, eggs, and all the others. So I want to just support and say that let this particular budget for the 2022-2024 be a budget that is going to serve the people of Kenya and more so promote the economic development of our country. I support, Honorable Speaker. Thank you.
The MP for Ikolomani.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for giving me this chance to add my voice on annual estimate 2023-24, Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll start by congratulating the Budget and Appropriation Committee for having done such a good job, Mr. Speaker, under the leadership of the Chair, Honorable Dindi Nyoro, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, having served in Budget and Appropriation Committee, you have to put in a lot of time because you have to gather all this information, listen to all the chairs, including Treasury, Parliamentary Service Commission, Chair, so that you come up with this report with the tight timelines, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to comment on health. On the health sector, Mr. Speaker, we have seen some improvement, a lot of improvement because of putting money where we feel, Mr. Speaker, that there will be return. Mr. Speaker, there is a demand for nurses, Kenyan trained nurses around the world. We have seen, Mr. Speaker, money being put in 21 KMTCs to be completed and 1 more billion Kenya shillings for employment of lecturers and staff to make sure the KMTCs across Kenya, Mr. Speaker, are operational. Mr. Speaker, the Budget and Appropriation Committee on that note have requested the members of Parliament in those areas to give back something for the good job which is being done by buying a bus for the KMTCs, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the chair for Education Committee presented a very good report, Mr. Speaker, and somehow it happens that I just come to speak immediately after him, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have seen private universities gaining a lot from public money, Mr. Speaker. This is an anomaly that has been corrected in this budget, Mr. Speaker. However, after removing public students from private university, Mr. Speaker, this budget has made sure that there is money to help those students who have been placed there, Mr. Speaker, because they were just placed, they didn't request for that, to make sure that they complete their course, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we've seen a recommendation that the infrastructure part of it in schools from Ministry of Education be done through National Constituency Development Fund, Mr. Speaker, because this is purely a function they are specialized in, Mr. Speaker, to allow the educationists, the teachers, Mr. Speaker, to be able to concentrate on their core duty of teaching and running the school, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there is also funds to help students from ASAL areas have a meal in a day, Mr. Speaker. This is a good program, Mr. Speaker, which we propose that this would be expanded throughout the country, Mr. Speaker, so that all students are able to get lunch, especially the students in primary schools and those ones also in day schools, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to comment on Treasury, Mr. Speaker. Treasury proposed that they will come up with the specific measures, Mr. Speaker, deliberate measures to make sure that pending bills are paid. They actually should become truly fast charge on every budget cycle, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as I conclude, I want to comment on agriculture, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have seen agriculture putting money in value addition, Mr. Speaker. We have put money in Rivertex, Mr. Speaker, to promote cotton, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the farmers in those areas, in cotton growing areas, Mr. Speaker, have been provided seeds, Mr. Speaker. This budget has attempted, Mr. Speaker, to revive ginaries which were there and had collapsed, Mr. Speaker. We request that, Mr. Speaker, more money be put in this area so that we have farmers in those areas having not to travel long distances to take their crop, Mr. Speaker, so that these ginaries, Mr. Speaker, are operational as soon as possible, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I want to stop there and thank you for giving me this chance to contribute on this budget, Mr. Speaker.
I must commend you for having been very considerate of your colleagues and taken half the time you allocated. I hope you will do the same, Ochanda. Then I will go to the only lady who is a chair. Unfortunately, there's no proper gender balance in the chairs over there. But anyway, continue, Ochanda.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'll want to be as brief, given I'll be considering basically your call. Mr. Speaker, if from a layman's point of view I were to make a budget for this country, there are three things that I'll place quite a bit of emphasis. One is on food, the second one will be on debt, and the third one will be on a social service that we call education. Mr. Speaker, education, I'm rising to support this, first of all because of the allocation that has been placed on the direction of education. Mr. Speaker, it is appalling. It is really appalling that there is a big crisis in the education sector. The education sector is rotting, services are down, and Mr. Speaker, by last week, I was really amazed. If in my constituency I will get students who are in Form 1 who could not read or write a Form 1. Mr. Speaker, education sector is in a crisis. And every little money that we were able to get, I'd rather place them on education as the other sectors stabilize on wherever they are for a period of time so that we bring up education. In education, Mr. Speaker, parents and BOMs are paying more than the government.
What's your point of order, the MP for Imirua Dikir?
Sorry to interrupt my friend, Mheshimiwa Chanda, Mr. Speaker, but I had mentioned something which I think, if it is true, that we need to do a very serious investigation.
Which
is Form 1
yes,
who doesn't know how to read and write. How did that student even reach Form 1? Not even Standard 4.
But
So, Mr. Speaker, I think
you have raised a very important thing, but how is that a point of order?
it is. That's wonderful.
Proceed, Ochanda, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr.
Proceed.
Speaker. What I'm trying to illustrate, Mr. Speaker, I've tried to check that across in the last 3 days, and I'm telling you, it is amazing that we have students in Form 1 who cannot read or write. And I've taken up this with the ministry since the last 3 days. That is a problem. I've mentioned, Mr. Speaker, that parents and BOMs in this country are supporting staff in schools more than the government. They have more teachers that they are supporting more than TSC, including some of the national schools. And of course, even a national school in my constituency has more BOM teachers than those that are supported by TSC. It is a crisis. And if you now add on even some of the things that the CS today was responding to, you sympathize with him. You sympathize with the CS of education. This thing of transition, the issue of this new syllabus, new curriculum, and how we are transiting is terrible. We are in a big crisis, Mr. Speaker. So if money is placed, and I'm happy, and that's exactly why I'm now supporting this budget, that a lot more money is this time round put in education. Mr. Speaker, we really still need much more. If we are able to really levelize all the other sectors and place all the rest, mop up all the money and take to education, we can recover as a country. Otherwise, we are in a crisis. Mr. Speaker, the second thing that I was mentioning was the issue of debt. I'm happy with the budget, that the budget is closing in the deficit. We are talking about 400 billion plus, which was not there before. And this is exactly towards the direction of reducing the issue of debt. The third thing that I was talking about, Mr. Speaker, is the issue of food. The issue of food. If we were able to place food, money on food, production, food reserves, to make sure that because we've been in a crisis for the last 3 years, food pricing and food availability we are in a crisis because of that. So if this budget will focus on that direction, I'm happy there's quite a bit of money, but it's not enough that is placed on the direction of food production. We are talking about here agriculture, whether it's crop or livestock. We are talking about fisheries here, and there's quite a bit of money that I've seen has gone into irrigation and stuff like that. But then there are elements of caution that I wanted to bring, Mr. Speaker. One, they are scattered across many other sagas and the departments. There is a department dealing with irrigation, and we have the irrigation authority. There's money that has been placed there. Then you have a lot more other monies placed on other aspects of agriculture in the name of, again, of irrigation, with different departments. I think that's where we are going to have a problem. The money that's gone to agriculture, we have to recognize that agriculture is a devolved function. So when we place money, and we are placing much more money, where is that money going to be reposited? The amount of money that we are talking about here is outside the monies that we are placing for purposes of counties, the 370 billion or so that are going to the counties. But then we have 100+ billion that's still going to agriculture. Where is this money going to be placed? Where is it going to be reposited? How are we able to increase the issue of food production? Is it the national government taking the bulk of the money again, or the money headed to counties where agriculture is practiced, where agriculture is done as a function, where livestock is done as a function, where fisheries is done as a function? Who is producing food, or who is helping Kenyans produce food? Is it county governments, or is it the national government? I think these are questions, hard questions, that we must address moving forward. There's no need of placing money. We place money for agriculture, and all that money is placed in Nairobi, yet agriculture is devolved. Mr. Speaker, that's an area where, in my view, we really need to look at very, very seriously. So, Mr. Speaker, in all, if we refocused on placing more money in agriculture, we are experiencing acute shortage, but as we are doing that, we are now talking about a potential for bumper harvest. Let me tell you, this thing of environment and rains and all that, we've had rains, particularly in my place. We were very happy that we were going to have some good harvest. Let me tell you, there were too much rains, it was for a short time, and the crops are failing now. Yet, there were indications that it will work. Right now, there are indications that everybody is seeing that we may have bumper harvest, and we are talking about fertilizer and all that. Anything can happen with the issue of climate change. Let's talk about how we can get food reserves and get them in time, such that when we have difficulties, we don't run around importing food. The amount of money we have spent in importing food in the last 2 years is enough for us to have food, proper food reserves in this country. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Chair for the Social Protection, Wambui Nganga, if you take as few minutes as possible, you will be able to give an opportunity to your colleagues also to weigh in on this before the end of the day.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. On offset, I want to support the motion on the report of the Budget Committee regarding the 2022-23 budget estimate. Honorable Speaker, my committee, it is the only one that deals with the vulnerable groups, the elderly, less privileged in this society, the children, street children, youth, people living with disability. Honorable Speaker, I noted when I was presenting the budget estimates after all the departmental visited the committee after scrutinizing and deliberating on the report, that the cash transfer need to be increased of the elderly. Honorable Speaker, we know the last time the money was transferred was in January, and yet the elderly, they receive this money for medication from their age. So once the cash is delayed, there's a lot of problems with our elderly persons. But I am happy, though not a lot of money has been added, but 500 million will add to the kitty. It is not enough. We know right now we are constrained of money, but in the future, we need to audit the cash transfer. Because we know it started in 2017. There are many elderly who have passed that age or who have reached that age and they have not yet been enrolled to this program. And we need to do that because we need to treat everybody equally. And that's when we went to do the presentation. We said we need to look into it. But before we do that also, we need to audit whether all of them still exist, because maybe some of them passed on and nobody has ever realized that. So we need to audit the entire program, as well as include those ones who are still missing in the program, to include them in. Honorable Speaker, as we speak right now, we also know their challenges. As these elderly are going to get their money, they also suffer a lot, because maybe even the telephone number that was given those years is still not the same one they use. Also, the money to go and pick their money from the houses to where they collect the money, we also see it is a challenge. So we need to audit this program and you see what is best so that we can be able to help our elderly as they are aging. We give them their dignity. We take good care of them because they also took good care of us when they were young. Honorable Speaker, another matter that raised in the budget estimate is the youth factor. We know the youth factor. We need to have more youth hubs at the constituency levels. And these youth hubs need to be equipped with ICT. And I can see the ICT chair here, where our youth can be able to create jobs for themselves, where they can be able to do their studies and also write their thesis using those computers, as well as, Honorable Speaker, you have seen there are so many content creators, young men and women that need to be promoted. So those youth centers, we said that those centers need to be renovated, as well as those ones that need to be built, so that all our youth across the country are well taken care of. And also noting that, Honorable Speaker, they hold the huge population in this nation. So we cannot wash away our youths. We need to treat them. Even when we are campaigning, we put them ahead. So even when we are budgeting, we also need to remember them so that we can give them also what they deserve, and they deserve this nation, Honorable Speaker, to think about them, and I want to thank the Honorable, His Excellency the President, because he is putting more effort into this renovation and taking care of our youths. Honorable Speaker, we also came across also the people living with disability. We have two bodies, National Council for the Disabled of Kenya and National Council for Persons with Disability. And as a community, we found that we need to merge these two bodies so that they can be able to take care of all those others, all those people living with disability, because when they are two, even as a committee, we wonder who are we oversighting, because it's only one that comes to us. There's another one that does not come to us, and yet they receive government kitty, and yet the Parliament does not oversight them. So as a committee, we felt like we needed to merge the two bodies so that they can be efficient and effective. Honorable Speaker, I also want to say that this budget is also taking good care of markets. From where we come from, a big population in our constituencies, they earn their livelihood from markets. And we need to upgrade these markets to a position that when it rains, they are covered, or when the hot sun comes, they are also covered, and they can transact their businesses well. Right now, as we speak here, when it rains, the price becomes very pathetic, or when it is very hot, their properties and their produce are spoiled by the hot sun. So once we come up with this market, it will really help, and it will help in a very, very, very big way. Honorable Speaker, there is also a chunk of money that we said we also gave the social protection department, because they have so many pieces of land across the country that are not fenced, and land grabbers, because they have now finished selling the prime lands, now they are now attacking the government property. So there's also money that we set aside for those, the land that belong to the government, if it can be fenced and given proper care so that these land grabbers can stay as far away as it comes, so as they come, because they steal everything. They steal even things they know that does not belong to them. They steal even things that are coming to help even their children. That when their children come of age, they will not even have a facility where they can go and have a field to pray, or even a place where they pass time, not only staying in the house, they can also go outside there and play football outside. But they have grabbed all these properties, and that's why we gave money to social protection department to make sure that those properties are safeguarded for the future of our children. Honorable Speaker, I would also want to state that there is a very good will in this nation, and everybody now has joined to support His Excellency the President. And I know even with the finance bill that we are going to be debating next week, why I am supporting it, one is because I need more money to be put in the Inua Jamii program, where all our vulnerable groups are going to benefit, and they can only benefit if the nation has money. But I also want to go on record to say this time round, let us not do business as usual. Corruption at this time, we cannot tolerate or engage. And I know, Honorable Speaker, I know you know these matters very well, that let us say anybody who is caught in the corruption cases and they are found guilty, so that we can set a record to this nation. These people, one or two, they need to be hanged, Honorable Speaker. If we hang one or two, then it will make corruption will be a thing of a past in this nation. Because we mean well, even we are going to correct money. Moving forward, we are going to correct money. The mood of the nation is we are going to correct money from the taxes. But also let us give our people back at home confidence that this money is going to the proper use. Anybody, including myself, anybody who is going to be caught on the wrong side of this money that we are going to collect, let us not spare our people to say they are from our tribe or they come from our region. It is a high time as leaders we take up this mantle and we say enough is enough. Once money is collected from the public, it needs to go to the use that it was intended to go and do. Not when the money is collected and the people say, it is our time to eat. And that's why I am proposing one or two of them. Anybody found guilty of taking government coffers money, they need to be hanged. And it is me who is saying, seated from here. They need to be hanged like other countries why they have progressed. Singapore has progressed because it is a corrupt-free nation. Another nation, they are a corrupt-free nation. With this one, with the money that we are going to collect, it will be enough for our programs to succeed. We have medicine in our hospitals. We have proper infrastructure. We have enough money for Inua Jamii. Honorable Speaker, I stand to support. Thank you very much.
The Honorable Sene, take the list so that Honorable Bukose can also weigh in. In any case, you'll be the first one in the proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The current economic situation in the country is not merely a product of simple step, hop, and jump. It is the cumulative product of a process that has been ongoing for years. The COVID pandemic, the Ukraine-Russian war, the drought that has been with us for the last 4 years, the debt that has gone to the ceiling in the last government. There is a perception out there that the mere change of government from the handshake government to Kenya Kwanza is the making of our economic situation. That is a very wrong perception that I think it should be corrected. It is mismanagement that has been going under other vagaries like climate change. Mr. Speaker, this budget proposal attempts to reverse what has been going badly in the management of our economy, from being entirely import dependent to at least be in the manufacturing league, however small. Mr. Speaker, the most discussed aspect of this budget proposal has been the issue of low-cost housing. Indeed, the housing levy is not a tax, and I believe it has a very big impact on our economy, from employment, supporting local industries, and in the long term, bringing down mortgages, because it is giving competition to the banks entirely. So I believe if it should be implemented, mortgage rates will come down, Mr. Speaker. One other thing that is hotly debated is the high taxing. The government is not a business enterprise. Governments get their resources, get their money for development and expenditure from taxing. And I believe there has been much hue and cry that taxing is going high. It is a global issue. Taxes are becoming high. There is a recession all over the world. It's just like labor pains. I can compare it to labor pains, Mr. Speaker. I'm the fourth born of my mother. If mothers will say labor pains are really very excruciating, and there is no need for procreating anymore, I wouldn't have been born and be the man who I am today in this house. It is just as simple as that. It is painful to raise taxes. It is painful to pay taxes also. So I believe we have to bear with this and make sure that this country can at least collect the resources it so requires to make sure that we can have money for our expenditures and development. Mr. Speaker, on the budget, there's much good things, including agriculture, to incentivize production than the case of subsidies in the previous government, so that there is much value addition and we can grow crops so that we can be food secure than being importers of food, Mr. Speaker. One other thing is the commitment on equalization. Equalization has been a very special fund for the marginalized areas. There is a deliberate move to make sure that all that has been pending is actually paid for and it goes to the right counties that are marginalized, Mr. Speaker. That's commendable. There is the recruitment of teachers, which is ongoing. There has been the recruitment of 35,000 teachers last year, and this brings me to the concern Honorable Fozia has raised, that this government spends funds. Actually, this is a democracy, and democracies are anchored on laws. Budgets are anchored equally on laws. This government has never had the privilege to spend much. This is its first budget proposal, and I believe they have not been collecting as such, and they never had the leeway to spend. Mr. Speaker, I can see time is not on my side. There is also the issue of recruiting 44,000 community health workers and teachers recruitment, allocation of judiciary, taking the judiciary to the counties, like Wajir, and even to the sub-county levels. There is focus on mining, and that's where I'm concerned. For us to create wealth, we must invest on mining mineral resources, gases, fuel, and all that is within the bowels of our earth, Mr. Speaker. Universal health care is also another very important thing in our budget. There is more funding for new administrative units to operationalize them, to take services closer to the people. And lastly, Mr. Speaker, because I can see I should not abuse your generosity to give me time. County allocation. We have been pumping colossal amount of resources to counties. But we have mainstreamed elitism, tribalism, corruption, all kinds of evils. Converse to the hope we have had at the initial stage. I think they don't raise it.
We ran out of time. You will still have another 4 minutes when we reconvene, and it's my humble direction to whoever is going to be on the chair to give the Honorable Bukase the second shot when the House reconvenes again. I do understand you have been waiting the whole day to have an opportunity. Order, 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 honorable members. Honorable members, the time being 9 p.m. This House stands adjourned until Thursday, the 8th of June at 2:30 p.m.